And let's have a look at the latest developments in the coronavirus pandemic. More than 4.7 million people are known to have been infected, and over 315,000 have died. India has extended its lockdown after reporting its biggest single-day surge of new cases, but the government has still eased some restrictions. In Brazil, regional leaders have warned that the healthcare infrastructure could collapse as the need for beds in intensive care units skyrockets. The death toll in Brazil has risen sharply, but President Jair Bolsonaro remains an opponent of lockdowns. And Greece has reopened the Acropolis in Athens and other ancient sites, along with high schools, shopping malls, and travel on the mainland. Well, supporters of Brazil's President Jair Bolsonaro have been holding rallies in several cities. The demonstrations took place against the background of soaring figures of coronavirus infections and related fatalities in Brazil. Bolsonaro attended one of the gatherings in front of the presidential palace in the capital, Brasilia. Figures show that Brazil has the fourth largest outbreak of coronavirus in the world. Nearly 240,000 people are infected and more than 15,000 have died of COVID-19. Bolsonaro has been heavily criticized over his policies to combat the spread of the coronavirus. He wants to roll back the lockdown in Brazil faster than many health experts advise. The move is opposed by regional politicians and communities strongly affected by the pandemic.
One by one, the sick keep arriving at this hospital north of Rio de Janeiro. It's barely been open for 2 weeks, and already 90% of its intensive care unit is full. People are coming from all over the region as other hospitals become overwhelmed by the numbers of patients needing treatment for COVID-19. The local health secretary says they're facing an emergency. This disease is not kidding around. Whoever thinks it's a joke is going to lose their life. Brazil has become the epicenter of the disease in South America. What's more, experts say fatalities have not yet peaked, and the worst is still to come. Yet despite the surge in deaths and new infections, the country's president, Jair Bolsonaro, wants lockdown measures imposed by state governors to end so that people can go back to work. Many, though, are choosing to ignore the president. In this poor neighbourhood of São Paulo, leaders are urging people to stay home or potentially be killed by the virus. The district is home to nearly 300,000 people and has the highest rate of infection in the city. The residents are doing all they can to protect themselves, but there are obstacles. We have a problem with water here. There's no water here for 2-3 days. The water just arrives at night. For all their efforts, it seems for some the only option may be to sit it out and then hope for the best.
Well, the pandemic has delivered an economic and a social shock to the United States. A particular challenge is the more than 500,000 homeless people. They're among the most vulnerable to COVID-19, lacking access to health care and even basic virus-fighting tools like hand washing. DW's Oliver Salet reports from the nation's capital, Washington, D.C.
Breakfast on wheels. Since the food bank closed its doors for the homeless, Rob Farley decided to bring the food bank to them.
Hey, Rick.
Hey, boss, how you doing?
I was coming up to see you. Or the brunch, I should say. It's not the lunch.
Bag brunch, coffee, and some warm words for the most vulnerable group of the pandemic.
It's a challenge, you know, but I try to do what I can. A little water, keep my hands and stuff clean.
Hello, David.
Rob Farley is a volunteer for a local church in Washington, D.C. Besides breakfast, he brings the latest news about what has turned into a serious threat for the homeless.
I think there's 81,000 people that have died, at least in the United States, yeah.
The U.S. is now number one in the total number of deaths in the world.
Oh, I think so, yeah.
That's unfortunate.
Yeah.
As the virus continues to spread in the capital region, Rob Farley tries to convince them to wear face masks, but that's one of the lesser problems.
I can't put it on your face. We're supposed to stay 6 feet apart.
No, tell him to
There
put it
you
on
go.
my face.
No. All right. For those that go into the shelter, I think social distancing is pretty tough to do in there. And then for many folks that stay out on the street, sanitation, you know, where to use the bathrooms, where to wash your hands.
With estimates of around 10,000 living on the streets, Washington, D.C. has one of the biggest homeless communities in the United States. To offer some protection, authorities have set up hand-washing stations, but not everyone has such easy access as this man who lives in a tent across the street. Nevertheless, no other group is hit as hard as the homeless, and that's especially true in some emergency accommodations that have been in the news. The coronavirus is of particular concern for many homeless shelters in Washington, D.C., and this is one of the largest facilities in the region. Reportedly, the virus has spread widely here, with several dozen cases of COVID-19 reported. While filming inside is not allowed, media reports say a lack of social distancing made it easy for the virus to spread. Pro bono lawyer Amber Harding says the homeless have to be taken off the streets.
We have 30,000 vacant hotel rooms in D.C. that we could use to place people in until, things settle down. And we also have vacant housing units, and we should be really focusing on putting people into long-term housing so they are able to protect themselves.
And so if we could stay as
Volunteer Rob Farley says keeping the homeless safe is the key for the whole community to recover from the pandemic.
That'll be good. What's up, Alfonso?
Vigilance is the key message in Italy as the country moves to relax its coronavirus lockdown after more than 2 months. Businesses are opening their doors again, but it will be far from a return to normal. Authorities warn that the virus has not gone away, and if new infections start to grow again rapidly, restrictions may come back.
Normally, the tourist town of Santa Severa would be packed in the middle of May, but due to coronavirus restrictions, residents haven't been allowed to sunbathe on their beaches for months.
Well, tomorrow, if the weather permits, I would like to come to the seaside with my bathing suit and go swimming if it's possible, and put up the umbrella.
Cafes and restaurants are slowly being allowed to open up under strict hygiene regulations. So is this cinema in Udine. Meanwhile, in the fashion capital of Milan, the famous Rinascente department store is opening its doors.
We use personal protective equipment and take everybody's temperature, monitoring the flow of people entering and exiting the building. This is the first step towards resuming normal life.
But out on the Milanese streets, most people are looking forward to looking beautiful again.
It seems obvious to me. The hairdresser.
Yes, I have to go to the barber. That's how much it's grown.
Manicure is what I've missed the most.
It may not be the Dolce Vita yet, but for most Italians, life is about to get a little bit sweeter.
And we head now to Rome, where journalist John Hooper is standing by. John, what's it like where you are, given this latest wave of easing?
Well, I would say that the emotions are a mix of relief that people are finally out of the severest phase of the lockdown, a degree of anxiety as to whether things might not be going too quickly. That held by some people, others feeling that actually this is overdue. And then a certain amount of confusion as people come to terms with the new rules, which are not easy to digest, particularly, I think, for elderly people. And there is also some confusion caused by the fact that the regions which have powers in this area have in some cases passed ordinances that are at variance with what the national government is imposing. And in one case, down in Campania, the region around Naples, the governor is saying, I'm just not going to obey this at all. We're not ready yet.
Wow. So a lot of tension there. Meantime, we know that the country is reopening its borders to EU tourists from June the 3rd. But what happens if travelers stay at home?
I think a lot will. I think a lot of people have been deeply worried by what has happened and have already decided that they're going to spend their time in Italy. There's also, I think, a push here which is partly patriotic and partly economic. People wanting to do something for the national economy and knowing that the tourist sector, which represents 13% of Italy's GDP, that will be suffering this year if people don't make good the shortfall in the tourists coming from outside.
With The View from Rome, journalist John Hooper. Thank you.
Yes.